Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's live. I'm your guest, Billy Mann, and today's host is Jill Whalen. And today is unusual in the sense that when Ankush Jane suggested this the other day when I was reaching out to everybody to see who would you like to hear and what would you like to hear about, etc., that Ankush slipped this one in here and suggested that we would do it. And today was one day that I didn't have any live set up, and Jill stepped right in there and offered it. So today's host is Jill Whalen. Like with every other single live that I do, there is nothing planned. It's to show up and have a conversation, and I'm as excited as anybody else because I have no idea what we're going to talk about today. And we'll let it flow and we'll see what shows up. But thank you all for joining us, and over to you, Jill Whalen.
Thanks, Billy. I'm really excited to do this with you because I realized too when Ankush suggested, we hear more from you. I was like, yeah, I was one of your first guests, I think, early on. And I didn't know you very well, and in fact, I was surprised that you asked me to be on so early, since we had never spoken before. So if I don't know that much about you and your story and how you got into all this stuff, I'm assuming there could be many of your other people who have been following you. You've been talking to so many other people, but we don't know who's Billy Mann. What's your story? So it would be great to start there. How did you get into all this stuff?
Literally by accident. I myself and Richard Morgan spoke about it yesterday. We both shared the similarity of a life-changing experience, and mine involved a bus jump. Simple as that, and a road traffic accident. And I had started coaching at that stage with my current mentor again, Simon Nottingham, and I was involved in a road traffic accident, and there was a moment in the absoluteness of it that I had accepted my death. Now, whatever story that comes out of that is literally, as you know, only made up. But when I woke up at the other side of the accident, I was more surprised than anybody else that I had survived, literally. And after about 48 hours, all that kept coming into my head about is if everything I believed before the accident is a lie, then everything after the accident is also a lie, because if I had died, all those beliefs would have died with me. And I had no idea what that meant. None whatsoever. But it was significant, because coupling that with that absolute silence, it just changed so many things in an instant. But not knowing what had happened, I thought, oh my God, my whole life is a lie. And I went straight off the ledge after that, shortly after that, for about 12 months. And something then really started to shift around the time my late brother-in-law got unwell with cancer. And I said to myself, I can't, I need to know what happened. It kept coming back to that nanosecond. And that began the process then of me beginning to search, Jill, for that answer, or whatever it was, or whatever I experienced. And I thought, then I often did the usual plethora of courses, NLP, and I did all of that stuff and wads of paper, and it was always everything but. It was just missing something, and I wasn't quite sure what. And NLP probably came the closest to explaining the structure of it, etc., but it still was missing the essence of it. And then it was through Simon again, who sent me an audio, one of Jamie Smart's earliest audios, and it literally landed like a bomb inside. And Simon said as soon as he heard it, he knew exactly what he was after hearing. And it took me a couple of goes. And I remember the first time hearing it, and he said, and I said, yeah, it's all about your thinking. He says, no, go back and listen to it again. And I went back and listened to it the second time, and I said, yeah, it's all about how you thought. No, he said, and he said, no, I was giving out to him, and I went back a third time, listened to it, and heard nothing. And about 68 weeks after that, then I figure I was having a conversation with my nephew one evening. His father had passed in the meantime, and the two of us were sitting, we were talking. And I have no idea in that what happened, but in that nanosecond of realization, I could see that he was making up his whole world inside his head, and that was literally the moment, and that began everything right there. Like, right in that moment, I can say I got it. And the following morning, then, without knowing how I was going to do it, how I was going to pay for it or anything, I rang Jamie's Matt's office. I spoke to Nicky and I put myself in on the first clarity course 7-8 years ago. That long back now. And that's what started it. That was literally what started it. And that's how I came out of it. Prior to that, I've been running business. I've been in business all of my life in some shape or form. And I suppose I was literally crippled with anxiety till I was, to the outside world, I'm very outgoing, to very effervescent. I'm very jolly and very outgoing and all of those things, but that did not reflect the story of what was going on in the inner world. And I was literally, at the time, I could only describe dying piece by piece inside me. Beautiful family and beautiful children, and I had a business that was making money and all of that. And, but that was still wasn't, nothing was feeling right. And then the downturn came in 08. And so business started to taper off, and that just really, so it all kind of collided in around the same time, that I was at a very low ebb despite the coaching. And it's most people wouldn't know that about me, because most people would see me as this very outgoing person, very public facing, etc., with everything that I've done, but they didn't know at the other side of it that, I didn't sleep at night. I was often walking the floor at 3 a.m., just in the darkest of places psychologically. And that was that moment then after the accident, about 12 months afterwards, and I knew something happened here. Something happened here that presented me with the answer that I didn't understand. So it was time for me to go and find the answer for it. And that's what led me into what it is. And I tried it all until that moment I came face to face with the principles, essentially. And that's where it started. Very simple at that stage. It was about 80 years ago now.
Wow, interesting. So that what you said about anxiety and how other people would never guess it. Like, do you find that, the people I talk to, that seems to be like they don't realize that, they think they're the only ones, because they look at everybody else like you and they say, look at him, he's got it all together. When inside you're, screaming or whatever. And, I find that so interesting. And that seems to make it worse for people, doesn't it? Because they think they're the only ones. Did you feel that way as well?
Oh, the isolation of that was something terrible. The isolation of that. Look, Jill, and I'm happy to recount the stories briefly, just to lend context to it, because I think it's probably important, but it's not a place I dwell in. I moved on from it. But having those experiences as a child, going to school, and then that bullying in second, in my boarding school period or whatever. But there was, despite having friends and stuff, there was a level of isolation during that particular period in boarding school that I would have always said at the time, it scarred me all the way through to my soul. And it was the loneliness more than anything else, and the powerlessness of it. I was powerless at the time when I was a child, that I was at that age that I felt I couldn't save myself. And every time I saw him, and I was living in perpetual fear. And that isolated me in here. And then I always had that overhang of loneliness then. That nobody understands this, nobody gets this, I'm on my own with this. And that was that story that perpetuated over decades. And part of it led to a breakdown at 19. There was a lot, it had significant impact along my life. Not realizing until now why and what it is, until that stage. But when we don't recognize it, it's going to play out through our behavior, through our life at some form. And it did for me in so many different areas. But the isolation of it is absolutely, that would have been, it was Simon, and I had tried counselling and I had tried everything, and it was perhaps the first great lesson that I learned working with my own coach for the first time was, you're okay. You're okay. You're okay. You know, and that was the moment when I began just, and this was prior to the accident and stuff, where I began to, oh, Jesus, pressure was off. You know, but I carried it for like 30 plus years. You know, and that was a hard journey. That was a hard, lonely road to walk. And I had all the trappings in every other direction. You know, and if material success is the guarantor of joy, I should have been fucking ecstatic. But nothing could have been further from the truth. It was the other way.
And that's the lie, right? That we are all, you know, we all think we're striving for these things, whether it's money or other people or whatever, because we think that's the thing that will make us happy. And then it's worse because we have those things and they don't make us happy. So how would you see it now? Like what, the way you used to be, you know, like if you were talking to your previous, the way you were, you know, how do you see what it really was, what was happening?
That's a good question, Jill. What would I say to my, if present day Billy was talking to 20 years ago, Billy? Is that what you're saying? Is that that the,
Yeah, I mean that,
okay,
yeah,
or
like
some
if
version
you
of
were,
that? Yeah.
yeah.
Um, you're not alone, and you don't need to be frightened all the time. I think I think if I had that, if I could say that to Billy of 20 plus years ago, I'd say, Billy, you're not alone, and it's okay not to be frightened all the time.
Mm.
And you know, that's the very first time I've said that.
Mm.
But that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Because that's where I was at for me.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the old adage of being lonely in a crowd. You know, they have to do the place you're most lonely is in the crowd. I think I was happiest at work during the day because I was always very fortunate with the women that I worked with. I developed very close relationships with them. We had a very loving relationship. Part of working with people all my life, Jill. And this lends to the other side of it then as well, that well-being and wisdom are always playing out for us, even when we don't know it, and even when we don't recognize it, and even even when we're thinking everything else is shit. The relationships that I built with my staff down through the years were all long-lasting, virtually all of them, solid and very loving. Because I always had a belief that if I'm going to spend the better part of my life, my day, my life, working with these people, and I have this opportunity, I may as well work with people that I can love and care with.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
that,
what were you doing? You're a hairdresser, right? Is that what it was?
a happy accident. A happy accident. My mother, she, I was working as a forester, funnily enough, planting and whatever, but it was a hard, dirty job, you know, and the winter that we had that we just passed over, Jesus, it was terrible, you know. I mean, you're standing on the side of a mountain and there's up in a desolate part of Ireland, there's a blizzard coming horizontal at you. You're thinking, no, I'm done with this now. And it was my mother that suggested hairdressing, and funnily enough, I went to the school that ultimately I wound up training in and wound up teaching in. I knew walking through within an hour, Jill, of walking through the door, that I knew this was going to be it. Whatever creative need that they wanted to be met got met in that moment. And that's what started a genuine love affair of the job. Because I loved it, I loved the expression of it, and I loved it. And when I was immersed in it, it fed that within me. So the beast would go to sleep. when I was hairdressing and creative and all of those things. It wasn't during those periods that it was at its hardest, because my mind was focused on creating stuff.
Yeah.
But the moment it stopped focusing on creating it, that's when the thread started to unravel. And 28 years ago, last February, I opened my business. And March, literally 28 years and 1 month later, this year I closed it.
So what happened? What happened with that? Or
COVID.
because that could be, yeah. So how did that play out? Were you knowing what you know now, and but still having that be your passion for 28 years? I mean, I get that too from my own business that I had for a long time. You know, you have a passion for something, and then poof, you're just ready to move on. Or
Yeah, it's very interesting. I tell you a little story, Jill. Going back a number of years ago, and I should have seen the signpost even then, but I didn't. And because I was always a voracious reader, and I read all kinds of stuff, and I'd read the back of a bleach bottle in the toilet as long as I was reading something. And I remember being inside in the salon, and over about, I actually asked 39 people. I remember the number clearly, and I asked these people. I said, if you arrived into your local bookstore, and on the bestsellers list you saw my face gurning down to you, and you go, oh look, Billy Mann is after writing a book, and you read the blurb at the back of the book, and the back of the book, and when you go, oh yeah, well that made sense that he wrote that kind of a book. What would the book be about? Just one of those random things, and it just kind of took fire, and it ran on for a number of weeks. And I asked 39 people that, and out of 39 people, only 2 said hairdressing. And this was prior to doing any of this work. Prior to it would come back 13, 14 years ago, I think, maybe, And actually, it was shortly after I'd moved premises, and it was 13 years ago, approximately 13 years ago. And I remember having this conversation over a number of weeks. And I would have asked all my regulars, people who would have had a long relationship with, what would it be? And only 2 of them said hairdressing. So maybe I should have seen the signpost. Maybe it took me a couple of years to figure out the signpost. But even back then, that was...
what were they saying?
Well, my people have been... Myself and Simon have often spoken about this, and he was spoken about the hairdressing and stuff. But he would say to me, and his whole coaching business has been around the hairdressing industry, but that would have been the commercial end of it, and he would always say to me, for you, he'd say to me, hairdressing is only a vehicle for people. That's it. Hairdressing is only a vehicle for people, for you, because yes, you love the hairdressing, yes, you're very good at the hairdressing, but it's because of the people rather than the hairdressing itself that... So all my relationships, I have long relationships with clients. We just fall into... So I've always been building those kind of relationships, Jill.
So in the talking with clients when you're doing their hair, and that you're really listening to them, as opposed to, as a client who goes to a hairdresser, I can tell with some it's just, the usual questions they just ask, and they're not listening. And
where are you going on holidays?
Exactly. It's like, it doesn't, I could tell, they're not even, if they don't care, and so I imagine with somebody who they can feel is really listening, it could be a completely different experience.
It used to drive the girls nuts when we'd have staff meetings. They used to go mad, because if I dropped into a conversation with somebody, I would literally delay my next appointment for this client. And often, I'd wind up cutting the hair inside in the kitchen at the back. I'd bring in a hand mirror, and I'd bring in the chair, and I'd sit them inside, because the tears, and that happened all the time. That happened all the time. And it used to drive the girls mad, because I would screw up the appointment book. Because I'd be falling behind. But I was always conscious if I opened something with somebody, it was really important that I closed it before they would talk. Now, I didn't understand the real deep meaning of that, but innately I understood that. that when you open something with somebody and they're bearing something to you, you don't just abandon halfway through or three-quarters way through. So I would know that when if the conversation was going there, I would go, man, grab the chair. And we go to the kitchen, and those conversations would happen in the kitchen, and it happened regularly, and it drove them mad because I was screwing up the appointment book all the time. But that was what it was about for me.
Well, the fact that they would even start opening up like that, is rare. When like I said, I can listen to the conversations in the hairdressing place where I go, and they're just so superficial. It makes me laugh. So the fact that, they were even doing that, like that's amazing. It's not at my place that I go to.
Well, you see, to me, it was always about relationship, and you are right. And it was something I always drilled into my staff, that we're in the relationship business. We're in the relationship business. Everybody that comes through the door gets the same respect, period. That's it. And it doesn't matter what's happening outside the door of the salon. What's only important is what happened inside the salon. And how we treated each other and how we treated people coming through the door. That was it. And that, to me, that's what it was about. And I will say that through that time, I imagine what honed off and off at the edges were the women I was working with, Jill. And the fact that predominantly my clientele would have been women. And I watched them, and I've said this before, I would see women, maybe I'd have a conversation with a woman, and maybe she'd have a colour in her hair, and I might have moved on to another client. And one maybe might have been listening to the conversation, and then that conversation would engage, and then they'd an island section that somebody would go, and they'd pull a chair over, and regularly I saw 3 and 4 women who may or may not know each other fall into a networking conversation of support. And I was continuously fascinated by the fact that this could happen so easily, and how women were so open to supporting each other if given the opportunity. Women would, I was always blown away by it. And I think given the right environment, which was clearly the salon was one of those environments, it was okay to do that.
Yeah.
It was okay to do that. And that was, and as I look back on it, I suppose I'd up to say to 8-9 years ago, I had 20 years of real grounding in listening and communicating with people. And that was also part of it as well, Jill, is that I wanted to learn, sometimes I heard things I didn't want to hear because I was unable to really understand what I was being told. And sometimes you heard the dark stuff. And again, like what goes on behind closed doors and stuff like that, and problems in marriages and things. And to the outside world, everything would look fine. But when you have a woman who's afraid to go home, or you know what I mean? I just didn't know what to do with it at the time.
Right.
And so I took Michael Neal's approach to it. I took the lamppost approach to it. Michael Neal's, just shut up and listen. And that's it. That's all I could do.
Yeah.
And that was also became part of, if people are going to open up to me, what can I give back? What can I do? How can I support this? Whatever, and that's kind of it all kind of came together in maybe in the space of a year or two, that type of thinking, So I was healing myself in one level, but it was also rippling outwards. And being in funnily enough, being on the salon floor and dealing with people at that level was also another way of me not being involved in my own world. Now I understand why. Because my own thinking had settled. And I wasn't listening at all to me. I was just solely focused on the person in front of me. So my own stuff would just go quiet. Now I understand that now, but I didn't back then,
Right. There's something about being in the flow that way that, that's what we're all really looking for, is just living life that way. So what happened then, as the last few years, you said, things weren't quite as.
Well, look, I had an unfortunate series of events, one after another happen, including my health. And I don't know if anybody can hear that now, but my wife and my daughter are pulling weeds outside the window, so I don't know what's going on up there.
We can hear a little, but it's fine.
It's okay. But I think when my health had failed, I'd had a bladder infection that was going on for a number of months that was really pulling me down, making me very sick. And then I wound up in hospital and I used to get over Christmas and wound up in hospital again after Christmas last year and stuff. And just how things had changed. And I think at this stage, my own passion had changed as well, Jill. Deep down inside, I knew this was the direction I was going in. And it's funny how when COVID came along and I had to close the salon, something inside me, no business owner, and you know this yourself, no business owner ever wants to close their door. Because the inherent risk is when you close the door, you may not be able to reopen.
Yeah.
It's easier to maintain the momentum. But if you try to handbrake on it, for whatever reason, restarting it can be an issue. But somehow deep down inside, there was a smidge of me that was kind of going, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. And a week later, then I began the series of these conversations, and one or two things happened along the way then. And with staff and they making decisions in the best interests of their life, and they were right to make that decision. And I fully understood their reasoning behind it, for very deep and personal reasons in their own lives. I just knew then it was time to call it quits. I knew it was time to call it quits. The questions that I would have asked myself, Jill, like, is this worth going back into, worth lifting it, worth putting the effort in when really my heart isn't in it anymore? And the answer to that one was no. The answer to that one was no. And it was clear and it was unambiguous to me. And of great comfort, actually. And one of the big lessons that I think I'd learned at that stage, Jill, was it's very easy to make a big decision with a clear mind.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, right? How you just know, like that decision came to you or whatever, however it came to you, and you just know you're ready, you're done or whatever. I mean, I had the same thing with my business. I just woke up one day and said, I'm done. My work here is done. I did this for this long and I loved it. But now I'm ready to move on to, and without really knowing what I was moving on to either.
That's not been in there. I think what made it easy, Jill, was that I've been at this side of this for many years. So I knew I was already looking in the direction of growth anyway. And, I'm currently kind of working out the best way of combining maybe a day or two of hairdressing every week. Because I have relationships with clients going back 2 and 3 decades. And I do not want to lose those relationships. I do not want to lose them. But the balance maybe would be 1 day, maybe 2 days, I don't know. I'm only kind of starting to figure that out now, and but the balance, literally the 80% of my week will be this. Mm-hmm. Because I just don't want to let go of the relationships and the hairdressing, and both will satisfy that need in me for however long more. It seems to make sense, but it's, we talk about the knowing all of the time, Jill. We talk about knowing, just knowing. And that was what was important to me. I just knew I knew, and there was no pain, there was no angst. Now, there was a bit of upset for a couple of days in the sense that I grieve for the loss of a lot of things, but that was it. It showed up as a loss. But the noise and the hassle and all, no, gone, done, finished, over. And the amount of people that would have come up to me afterwards, of friends, and saying, geez, man, I got over that particular weekend, it was a tsunami of messages. I literally had to put my phone down for 24 hours. I just couldn't go near it. I couldn't, because the messages and the phone calls, and it was a bit overwhelming. And I knew, look, just okay, Bill, put down your phone, stay with your family, go for your walk, let everything settle, and come back to when you feel everything. And it just took that couple of days to settle down. And it did. And the resultant issues, like about the tidying up of closing a business, you'll have that with banks and all that type of stuff, has got to be dealt with. And as I was saying to you, it's quite a fascinating observation to see me in this, with these things, where just dealing with it is very much a matter of fact, as part of the process, as opposed to a reflection of a failure or a reflection of this or there's none of that thinking. Oh, this needs to be done now. Before I left here, before I came on, I was filling out a questionnaire from my accountant. He just went to, what's this, and I was just, before I came on, and I was just filling it out. Just filling out on this, they said banks for 10 minutes in before we came on, but that was it. It's all part of being okay.
Yeah.
It's all part of being okay, that we can be completely at peace with a big decision.
Yeah, I love that. And it's the difference between, you can be feeling all the things. Mm-hmm. You're going to feel the whatever, all the different things, the sadness and and everything, but it's not a suffering, because it's not you made the decision, and then everything else just falls into place, and whatever feelings come.
Well, I never saw those. My perspective on all of that was, it was a reflection of how much it meant to me. These relationships meant to me. That if I didn't give a shit and just walked away, and I just walked away, Jill, what would have the last 28 years and all those relationships really have meant to me? And to me, that was, for being upset for that couple of days, for the things that were really important to me, was good. It was okay. It was right. It was okay. It's okay to feel those things.
Yep. And that's still peace.
It's still
peace. And that's the little bit that sometimes gets confusing to people, right?
The want to mitigate it.
Yeah.
The want to mitigate it. There are times we're always going to be challenged. That's, I would say, life is a contact sport. Of course it is a contact sport. It has to be. Life is always unfolding, and we're going to bump up against certain events in our life. That happens. And one of the deep lessons that I learned during COVID was this particular lesson around pain and suffering. That part of making the big decision is the willingness to accept the pain of making the decision, because the suffering of not making the decision was going to be a prolonged and painful and ultimately damaging to all kinds of relationships, including my own relationship with myself, essentially. And so the way to peace, as I saw it, is through pain, not through suffering. So it like that part of the loss and that part of the grieving, that is the immediacy of what showed up. And rather than mitigating it, and rather than, I felt it fully. And because I knew that, look, this is part of, and if I didn't give a shit, that would have been a horrible way to have spent the last 28 years, not caring.
Mhm.
not caring.
That's an interesting insight, that, the not making a decision, is that's the suffering right there. That's all that thought, should I, shouldn't I, and going crazy in our
Mhm.
heads about all that. And then as soon as you just make a decision, it
On.
goes
Yeah.
away. The
And,
suffering goes.
and the irony is the things that we need the most of or want the most of in our life is directly beyond that decision.
Yeah.
Is literally beyond that decision. The moment that decision is made, everything else is open to this. The universe is open to whatever abundance means to you, because you're at peace and open to receiving it.
Mm.
And the decision wasn't a neglectful one. It was a decision based on well-being, a decision based on expansion, a decision based on growing into a new life. And the joy of consciously creating something brand new. And it was something that Dominic Scafidi said in one of these lives when he said, and I remarked it even to him, that we create a life or a job or whatever it is, but we create, and every day we get up to recreate it without realizing that's exactly what we're doing.
Hmm.
And that
Who
really,
did you say? Who said
Dominic
that?
Scafidi said it,
Okay.
and it just landed with me, and it all kind of landed around the same time, and I kind of, well, okay, maybe it's time to create something brand new, that if I want to repeat this over and over every day, it may as well be something that I really love repeating every day.
So what is it you're creating now? You're doing, it's your
This,
coaching business you're
the coaching
focusing on?
business. Well, that's what I'm focusing on now, primarily, of course, and closing down the aspect of the technical aspect of my business, and just closing that down. That has to be dealt with, and
Once that's done.
that's that's still consuming a little bit of time, but to
Yeah.
me it has to be done with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be done with integrity, and however that happens and however that shapes up, I want to walk away from it right. That the best that can be done will be done, and move on from it. So that's consuming a little bit of my time, but primarily this is my focus now: building relationships, coaching. um, I would think that one of the things that makes me laugh so much about all of this, Jill, is that there was a moment when I discovered, when I would safely say, oh shit, Sid Banks is 100% correct.
Hmm.
Is 100% correct. And it took that break in the momentum of my life with COVID long enough to step back and just slow everything down enough. It was an enormous gift to get that. And say, really, is this the direction that you want your life to be moving in this particular direction? And the answer was an unequivocal no. No. This is the direction I want to be moving in. And the work is easy. It's not like you say, if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. And for a long time, that would have been true of that other job, but it wasn't for the last couple of years. But this was, and this is, and this will be.
Yeah.
And this is primarily where I'm going now. And I am ultimately grateful for COVID. Ultimately grateful for COVID, because it stopped my life that I had been on, and it gave me the opportunity just to stand back and look at it. And knowing what I know about the acceptance of the unfolding in a given moment, it's okay to experience it. It was literally okay to be okay with it. And with this thing, it kind of rolled in, and the coaching is part of this, I said to my wife one evening, we were talking about this, and I said, it's not really great as a coach if I'm going to ask people to do things that I'm unwilling to do myself. Because when we're working with people, and you know this, Jill, and they come to you, sometimes it may require that very tough decision
Mhm.
of being in a situation and bringing somebody to that point where they can see that if this decision is made, the likelihood is that everything is going to improve on the other side of this. And often our job is to be there with them when they're, to bring them to that, and then ultimately while they're making that decision and moving through that, we're with them making that decision and with them in that process of moving into a new world and into a new life and into new whatever. But it wouldn't say much if I wasn't willing to do it myself.
Yeah.
It wouldn't say
And
much if I
being an example like that is powerful.
Mm.
So who would you say is like your ideal client? Have you figured out that kind of thing?
Jill, that's a question that, at one stage it was anybody with a pulse. It
Yeah.
was, you know,
The usual answer.
yeah, is he still alive? If he is, I'm on the way. 1 second, I'm bringing my toolkit and I'll fix it. But that has shifted over the time in very recent times that I find that where I'm working now, people, including coaches, and is people in that transition period. People working in a transition where they feel that life is, and it's funny, this is how I have, with the clients that I've been working with recently, that this has shown up corporate to personal, within jobs, within, removing the stuckness of it, the integration of principles into coaching and, and that type of stuff, people who are transitioning across.
Mm.
And I suspect now I know that I'm going through what I've been through myself, and knowing what I know about what it means to step beyond that created day, the fear, the anxieties, and all of those things that we all face as human beings. That I suspect will inform a sizable section of how my coaching will move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Being there with people and being there with people who are in transition seems to be where everything seems to be rising for me. And that essentially is, and if you're asking me, that again, I'll repeat, that is the first time I have said that, Jill, because as I've stood back and as I've had a look, the people that I have been coaching recently have been in those transitional phases of life.
Yeah. Well, I imagine with COVID too, that's a lot of people questioning what, what to do next, where to go, people who've lost jobs, people who just are like, I don't, just rethinking it. It really does. As you said, it can be a gift for many people.
That's what I found, Jill, and this ultimately is the, oh my God, Sid Banks is correct, gift of all of this. Because there is an enormous difference in the reactionary, oh shit, this is, I'm panicking and overwhelmed, and then make decisions trying to mitigate that, which are not decisions of well-being usually. They're decisions of fear, and they're decisions of reactions, and they're decisions that we all innocently make. We don't understand that. But there is, and absolutely is, another way. And when we're able to slow stuff down, Jill, long enough to recognize what's really important, we're then guided by that feeling, that sense of well-being and the rightness of our direction. And it makes those decisions really easy when we know, when the debris is cleared back, that we're guided by that feeling, we're guided by that decision. And those decisions aren't really that hard because everything starts to get very obvious very quickly. And the world is full of opportunity. And like Richard said it yesterday, he said, it's already waiting for you. It's already here. It's already been created. You simply haven't put out your hand and said, thanks, I'll have that, But ultimately, it is about living a happy life. And with the most important component, being happy. That comes first.
Yeah.
That comes
And
first.
I love that. I mean, that's what I always said, follow the fun. And, when it's not fun anymore, like you said, then, why would I want to, why would I want to be doing this?
Mhm.
There's some things, obviously we have responsibilities, but if we follow the fun, like that's when all the good stuff comes to you, the money comes to
Yeah,
you,
totally.
it's really amazing. It's really true. And I wish more people would trust that.
Well, look, Jill, I mean, despite all the work that I did, to me, COVID was like the final lamination of my understanding. All lot of the stuff that would have been there that I wasn't that I hadn't road tested, finally burnt off from what was left was a hardened understanding for the one of it. Yeah, this is definitely for 100%, absolutely, unequivocally true. Whatever that means to me, that's 100% true.
Mhm.
And it's on, like, you have made that decision, Jill, and you understand what I'm saying to you. On the other side of it, it's okay. But sometimes there's a period like where, like me, if you've been racked with insecurities down through the years and stuff, you'll suffer with it for ages. Should I, shouldn't I, will I, won't I? Oh God, what's going to happen? I mean, I had all that story going on, and it comes layered with a family that are all in business and very well known. And I was like, oh, geez, like, I won't have to face people. And that all that's, what happens if I'm gone to the wall, and all this stuff would, a couple of years ago, despite understanding, I didn't think that it was just thought. It felt very bloody real at the time.
Yeah.
It felt
Don't see
very
it.
real at the time because I was
Don't
head
see it
making.
as
Yeah,
story.
yeah, I was in the hole at the time. And all COVID did was, like, COVID handed me the ladder to climb up just high enough that I could, yeah, it's time to go. It's time to come out of the bunker, time to come out of the hole, whatever it was. And it's easy enough, like, when we've made that decision from a place of well-being, but sometimes people don't understand that. They're not quite
And
sure what that is.
it's not easy. Like a relationship too. Like you can, people can be on the fence, sort of know they need to leave or should leave, or, but you can't just be like, okay, I'll just leave. This
Yeah,
isn't fun anymore. There is so much more to it. But when you do, when you
yeah.
are able to make that decision from the right place, then it
That's
falls into place.
that's the difference between understanding and narcissism, for the want of a better description, isn't it? Really, in that type of behavior where ultimately you're just going to walk all over people. You're going to trample them. You're going to just. That's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
It's the opposite of that. It's done with care for yourself and for those that are around you, because often the healthy decision to make is maybe leave for everybody concerned.
Right.
But it's a healthy decision, not based on a desire to hide my insecurities, or hide it by just literally trampling out over people. That's not. There's a huge difference in that, and understanding that that yes, there is pain here leaving, but it's for the right reasons. It's for my well-being. It's for their well-being, because this isn't working out for anybody.
Mm,
And life is all about relationships. Even the business, it doesn't matter. Relationship is key to everything we do in life.
yeah.
And that was a marvelous, marvelous, marvelous lesson to get during COVID, was to recognize that as clear as I saw it.
Yeah. But yeah,
And
what I'm hearing is it, um, the difference between doing something from a place of love. You even leaving a relationship, you can be doing it from a place of love, leaving a business from a place of love, and your clients from a place of love. That's the difference, rather than fear. You didn't let the fear of the COVID and everything else, that wasn't driving your decision.
no, but it wasn't. You are 100% correct. What kept me there for longer was the fear.
Exactly. That's what
What
keeps us in the relationships too.
relationship was the fear of being out the other side of it. No, hand in heart, my wife has been incredible, because I would say that was perhaps the toughest conversation to have. You know, this is the life that we built and created together, and suddenly I'm just yanked up the handbrake and gone 180 and gone this way. Sometimes, you know, like I said to somebody, if we want to use the car metaphor, it's like me pulling the handbrake and everybody in the seats just going forward and hitting the windscreen and coming back again, you know. Sometimes it takes people around you a little bit of time to catch up with that decision.
Yeah, for sure.
And when my wife did, she has been incredible since, because she knew, she sensed that this is done. And it took her time, and I had to give her time to do that, and that's fair enough.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. And since then, she has just thrown her shoulder to the wheel and got on with it, and has been fantastic since. So I've been very fortunate that way.
Yeah.
Been very, very fortunate that the people that matter the most in my life got it. Because I'm taking them on this journey. I'm not doing this alone.
Right.
And I said to my wife, this is a 24-hour-a-day decision. This isn't a decision that I'm making lightly, without the implications of there are many people that this will affect along the way. But ultimately, you know, my children and people who know me need to see that they don't need it. The decision is theirs. But that if just being okay sometimes isn't enough, it's just more, that's a bit of an existence. Things were going fine, they were doing okay, you know, but is okay the life you want to live? Is it just kind of, it's just fine, you know what I mean? Everything is just kind of flatlined. And it's not, I'm not talking about the excitement and the roller coaster. That's not what I'm talking about. But the sense of it, that expansion within yourself.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. And it's important that my kids would see that, you know what, sometimes the circumstances aren't ideal, but it doesn't rob you of opportunity. It doesn't rob you of opportunity. What robs you of opportunities when you're closed down. It's very hard to see out when you're constantly just.
I love that, because that's, you know, if we're waiting for the right time, or when everyone is going to get on board, we're never going to make these decisions. And but when we come from that place of love, they will see, they will see that we're doing it. But if you're trying to make a pro and cons list, or something, it's probably not going to work, because you'll never, it's going to be rare that you're going to be able to say, well, it's okay that I'm not going to be making all this money now, like that. That's never going to look like a good decision mentally.
No. But if that's your yardstick, in life, just money, like I spoke with a client this morning, the Ferrari is beautiful for 2 months, but it's just another car after a while. Having this is wonderful for a little bit, but it's just that after a while. It's just another game, in that sense. But it's when it's the other way around that it's just a part of the expression of joy, that you have this abundance in your life and you can have this, but it's not about this. It's about this. And the world is full of, if it's down to money, the world is full of money, Jill. The world is full of money. Yes. But the time and the love and the family and the things that are really ultimately very, very important do pass. And to me, I would say ultimately that is my only worry, in the want of a better description, is sorting out that whole money thing, because the rest of it is perfectly fine as it is. So I can say I'm really, really lucky that I've only one issue happening in my life right now. It's not that big an issue. I mean, if I was lying in the bed in the hospital, Jill, with COVID or any other illness, I'd certainly be glad of this problem right now. because right now I'm fully able to address all of this stuff. It's no big deal. We get to make up our lives. We get to move forward. We get to grow and expand. It gets so much easier. And to me, this is what I have found. It is so much easier now that the decision is made.
I think that should be your tagline. It's no big deal. Billy Mann coaching. It's no big deal.
I might just, I don't know,
I like that.
yeah, it's no big deal. That's not a bad tagline. It's not a bad tagline. You know,
Because it's
I mean,
really like if people could see that's it right
yeah,
there. You
yeah.
know,
It's no
we
big
make
deal.
big deals, but it's no big deal.
It's no big deal. It really isn't.
And Billy, thank you for allowing me to have the honor of being the one that got to know you better and
Is that
everybody
an hour
else.
gone? Wow, it's 55
Yeah.
minutes. Wow, Jill. Gee, that was it's different on the other side of it.
It went by so fast.
It did. Jill, thank
I
you
think
so much. When I started, like I said, I've told you before, when I start these conversations, I love to see what shows up in the conversation, what shows up. And some of the stuff that I've spoken about today is that, and things that I've seen even in this conversation, that when I stood back to look at you asking about the ideal client and stuff, I hadn't seen it as clearly as I've seen it now. That there's actually been a thread, an arc running through the relationships I've had recently with the majority of my clients. And it's, you know, and thank you for helping me with that.
Maybe I should be a coach after all.
Maybe you should. You're not bad at this game, you know. Okay, Jill, hold on 1 second for me. To everybody else that has been watching this or will watch this, it's quite an interesting experience to actually be interviewed and be on the other side of it and to speak. And I appreciate all of you taking your time to watch this, and most especially Jill Whalen for such a gentle and deft way of asking the questions that would provoke an answer from me. I am very grateful for the insights of Jill that I've had today. It's no big deal. You know, it
thank
culminated.
You for the honor of getting to do it.
You know, it really did. And this, I think, you know, I've often told bits of the story, but I think perhaps this is one of the first times I've pretty much pulled that whole story together. I hope it's been useful for you, or as useful for you, and will be as useful for you as it has been for me. In the meantime, I'll see you all next week. Thank you all for joining me. Bye for now. Jill, thank you.
Bye, everyone.